Hello, and welcome to the Chucklefest with me, Dr. Chucklefest. In part one, we discussed the 1972 book, The Limits to Growth, which, amongst other things, had a model in it that sort of predicted, industrial agricultural collapse by the mid-early 21st century in a world of finite resources. Part two focuses on the now, and there have been many studies published since The Limits to Growth. Here I'll be focusing mostly on one from November of 2023. And good news, everybody, everything's fine. Don't worry. We're doing great.
I walk 47 miles of barbed wire. I use the cold snake for a necktie.
Got a brand new house on the roadside, made from rattlesnake hide.
I got a brand new chimney made on top, made out of a human skull. Who do you love? Who do you love? Who do you love?
So let's just get started on this bitter feast. Published in November 2023 in the Yale-founded Journal of Industrial Ecology, in Recalibration of Limits to Growth, an update to the World 3 model, the authors essentially remaster the model used in the 1972 book with refined methods and generally far more accurate data. They also map two new variables, the Human Wealth Index and ecological footprint. Their data is far more extensive than in the original study, and of course modern computing power has allowed them to fine-tune their recalibrated model. In this graph, that could well serve as an emetic, the dotted lines represent the original World 3 scenario, the standard run or business as usual model. The solid lines are the recalibrated values. The recalibration's pink line shows a greater amount of non-renewable resources decreasing with the same acceleration and then deceleration to comparable levels. This, along with pollution, the new study makes clear, are the two hardest variables to meaningfully estimate and can perhaps never be fully quantified with total accuracy. The original World 3 standard run suggested a much earlier peak in pollution, but the recalibration puts that peak closer to the turn of the century. Pollution is very hard to express as a single line. Do you measure weight, damage to the environment, how sticky it is? The recalibration uses CO2 concentration as a proxy, rather than attempting to estimate different pollutants with different effects, and the study admits that this is a limitation. But, with a far deeper data set than we had in the 1970s, this explains why the models differ most on pollution. The new study's outlook for population peak and decline, on the other hand, is very similar to the model presented in 1972. They both depict the rate of growth further decreasing and the total peaking in the next decade, and then declining almost as quickly as the projections grew, far more so than UN or world data projections. One of the reasons for this is that the UN's projections are not influenced by the variables in World 3, namely industrial and agricultural output. But also, in the past at least, some UN projections have been based on key assumptions that are now clearly fallacious. Until at least 2005, at least some of their estimates assumed human life expectancy would continue to grow during the 21st century at the same rate it had grown in the previous decades, with the belief that by 2100, average life expectancy for newborns world over would be well over 100 years. And indeed, world population has grown beyond the projections of either the old or new World 3 models. Nevertheless, with the worldwide growth rate the lowest it's been in a century, that curve is coming. We're not quite there yet in global terms on seeing population curve off, but with declining birth rates, that curving is statistically inevitable unless people just, stop dying. In the World 3 model, population responds to the limits of industry and agriculture, and is about 15 to 30 years behind these influences. So when we start to see that curve, it isn't the system correcting itself, but responding to declining industrial growth, or at least some sort of pressure. This trend is more accurate right now in the developed world, but it seems likely the developing world will follow that pattern. To put it very simply, the economy needs there to be more people, so the economy won't collapse. But industrial output can't keep up with the demands of feeding, clothing, caring for, and occasionally waxing an exponentially growing population anymore. Supply can't meet demand, so prices rise. It costs more to live, thus deterring people from having more children, which are necessary to shore up the economy. Ergo, problem. And, as you can see, the recalibration has industrial and agricultural output higher than the standard run, but peaking and collapsing around about the same time. Around about now. Which means it's never been a better time to take out a mortgage. Well, in fact, the recalibration paper admits, a bit ominously, that the turning point remains hidden, but according to the industrial output graph in Figure 3, the peak has been reached today. In fact, the discussion and conclusion of the recalibration paper are distinctly direct compared to the dry reporting of before. It says that, as a society, we have to admit that despite 50 years of knowledge about the dynamics of the collapse of our life support systems, we have failed to initiate a systematic change to prevent this collapse. Oof, judgy. And although there is the constant caveat that this is just a model, not a prediction, even through the academia, it certainly comes through that the authors, in fact, are pretty close to being certain. But they and I emphasize it is just a model, and they make clear that Recalibration 23, the new model, can only model its variables with any degree of accuracy up until the tipping point, if there is one, and if these theories are not totally wrong. With the inference being that once the tipping point has not so much been reached, but when we realize we've reached it, shit is going to meet fan. Perhaps. The paper also mentions that the Human Wealth Index has declined and that the death rate has increased. But since its publication, and as of this video, the HWI is at a plateau, and the death rate has partly gone down, and global life expectancy at birth has also gone down, from 73 to 72. But there are other, less graphy signs of reality, matching the projections of the big brains and their magic computers. We are feeling and living through the growing costs of resource limitations. Copper prices, for example, that's still a graph. Copper prices hit an unprecedented peak in May of 2024 at over $5 per pound. This is because, even though production is the highest it's ever been, it's more expensive to mine copper than ever. Naturally, throughout time, we've mined the copper that's easiest to get, the most economical to extract. So now the purest veins and the easiest to reach copper is gone, and although there's a huge amount of copper still available, the stuff we can get is of progressively lower grade. It's on average more sparse, which means more processing and more byproduct, more rock that isn't copper to deal with. Instead of picking it off the surface, we're moving into deep ocean mining to get copper. More expensive. In short, it takes more energy to extract, it costs more per pound, which means components using copper cost more, and you better believe that cost is passed on to you, dear consumer. But the copper situation is by no means a crisis, but I think it's a good example of the stress that both Limits to Growth, the newest study, and other adjacent studies project. Copper is critical to our modern infrastructure. It is also incredibly abundant. Nevertheless, supply can only satisfy demand with ever-growing costs to extract it, that, if continuing, will become the limiter of supply itself. All of this despite copper being relatively easy to recycle. Regionally, a similar situation is present even with some renewable resources. The Ogallala Aquifer runs under 8 states in the US, It's one of the world's biggest shallow aquifers, and it has been crucial in the development of industrial agriculture in the US, currently supplying nearly a third of the water needs of US agriculture. But the water table has dropped an average of 28 feet, or about 8.5 meters, since the mid-21st century, with some wells seeing a drop of 100 feet, or 31 meters. This has accelerated, and some wells are seeing drops in the water levels by as much as 2 feet per year. Texas A&M University reckons that at this rate, Ogallala will be depleted by 2100. In some counties in Kansas, the thickness of the aquifer has reduced by more than 80% since they were first tapped for irrigation, and in the high plains of Texas, pumping costs are beginning to become prohibitive, with farmers turning to uses of their land that don't require irrigation. Pressure on water supply is seen across the globe. The aquifer beneath the North China Plain supplies water to huge complexes of farms, but the water table there has been declining by 1 meter a year over the last decade. In many other places, rapid agricultural development has drained aquifers faster than they can replenish, to the point of running them totally dry. And as with copper, water is abundant. The problems are reaching enough of it to satisfy demand. How do you get enough water inland? How do you get a meaningful amount of copper off the seabed and still make a buck? Demand for silver, on the other hand, has outstripped supply for 5 years running. Extraction and processing of silver is steady, peaking around about 2015. But demand, largely but not totally driven by industrial needs, has increased and eaten into stockpiles and reserves. These reserves are difficult to estimate because there is at least some concern in the industry around double counting, but metal investment group Sprott reckon there are about 1.5 billion ounces in reserves, in banks and vaults belonging to corporations and governments. That's not a lot when you consider that demand in 2024 was 1.2 billion, and only 1 billion was able to be supplied. In the history of the world, it's estimated that about 1,740,000 tons of silver has been mined, and that about 560,000 tons remain in the soil. Extreme ductility and other properties of silver make it difficult to economically replace. This is even truer for helium. With a typical MRI machine using about 1,000 litres of liquid helium a year, the medical sector is the biggest user, accounting for almost a third of demand. Helium is also an ideal coolant for nuclear reactors, as it cannot become radioactive. It's essential for research, the creation of superconductors, numerous industrial processes, and not to mention filling balloons with so that it can be returned to space. Researchers have ummed and erred about whether there is a helium shortage or not, with a suggestion being that there wouldn't be a shortage if the helium released by other mines, in particular natural gas mines, was captured. But demand is set to outpace supply, and the increasing cost of helium affects especially the medical sector, but also society as a whole. And by affects, I mean it drives prices up. There is also a perennial shortage of cement that has existed globally for at least 10 years. That's because the Earth is running out of suitable sand. It's the most consumed commodity on Earth after water. To make concrete, the sand has to have been eroded by water. That means it has to come from beaches, riverbeds, or floodplains, or it has to be replaced with artificial sand. But that has not so far plugged demand. It seems this shortfall in supply is a chronic issue for the industry and the development and maintenance of infrastructure. This graph here shows the producer price index of concrete in the US, essentially inflation from the production end, not necessarily the price paid by consumers. It appears as though concrete production, limited by cement, limited by sand, has either peaked or at least plateaued, driving its costs higher. This is just a handful of examples of resource output requiring ever more input, driving prices up across the economy. Pressures on the complex production supply chain of synthetic fertilizers is one way the recalibrations model could play out, with industrial downturn caused by production costs triggering falling agricultural output. Synthetic fertilizers are thought to be responsible for the feeding and existence of half of the world's population. Modern industrial farming depletes nutrients out of the soil far quicker than they are naturally replaced, so nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus fertilizers are applied. All of these can be found in food waste and excrement, but not on an industrially meaningful scale, not on a scale that could replace synthetic fertilizers. Manure can be used to fertilize crops, but manure needs to come from animals that need to eat, and on an industrial scale, they need to eat crops that have been fertilized. Phosphorus has to be mined from phosphate rock, and like copper, that is quite abundant on Earth, with a total of 300 years supply left, but not with exponential population growth. But again, the problem isn't running out, it's that it's more expensive to get, and this has already contributed to rising food prices globally, with the poorest countries seeing on average higher inflation and higher food costs. In the last few years, regional shortages of fertilizer have sent crop and food prices rapidly rising and falling. Nitrogen, like phosphorus and potassium, recently experienced a peak in price, the highest since 2008. The United States Department of Agriculture's view is that this is not an effect of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the supply and price of fossil fuels necessary for the creation of synthetic fertilizers. But there is for sure a geopolitical layer over all of this, with the farmers and the food eaters in developing nations taking the impact. But even with the tremendous risks of synthetic fertilizer supply issues, I cannot say we're going to imminently run out of this or that. That isn't the case, and it isn't what is projected by either the limits to growth or the recalibration. But it is the case that many of these resources are under tremendous strain to keep up with demand. It's not that supply is collapsing, it's that the world economy and impetus to continue industrial output depends on growth, and the rate of growth is teetering? Maybe. However, it's the general increasing scarcity of all these resources that the new Yale paper suggests may cause industrial and then agricultural collapse, necessary things becoming so expensive that demand is destroyed. Food then possibly becoming so expensive that it's not profitable to produce. But maybe not. No one can predict the future, even with a magic computer. Some researchers have started to refer to the current period that we're in as the period of Polycrisis, with the Polycrisis being defined as a series of crises of global significance that each compound each other. And in the world of Polycrisis, the problem we have with resource extraction and inflation, that's one crisis. There are many other crises. Have you been outside lately? Getting hit by crises. Just walking down the street. Both the old and the new World 3 models make clear it's resource depletion that triggers the model collapse. But they also make clear that if, somehow, population was managed and industrial output became magically super efficient, even if we tapped in a cheat code for infinite, on-demand resources, the graphical, the statistical collapse would still happen, albeit later this century, not from resource depletion, but the pressures of pollution. It is clear now, pollution and climate change isn't just an existential threat for our wee lungs, but also to many industries too. Nitrogen fertilizers require a lot of natural gas to make, but its effect on the environment is far more acute than that. A great deal of the nitrogen and phosphorus used as fertilizer ends up in the world's oceans, after rain washes it from fields into local water systems. A sudden, often seasonal abundance of nitrogen and phosphorus can allow massive hypoxic algal blooms to flourish in the bodies of water, and over the years these have killed millions and millions of fish. But you might argue the greatest loss here is the precious fertilizer, because algal blooms are nothing next to the general ecological crisis in the oceans. Billions of crabs in Alaska recently died because of rising sea temperatures there, and the local fishing industry was crushed. Climate change has devastated numerous species, especially migratory fish. The ocean is not going to run out of fish, and acidification is a dangerous prospect but not imminent. But I think more pressing than all of that even is climate change's effect on the thermohaline current, the ocean's thermal conveyor belt. The Atlantic meridional ocean circulation is vital for shifting around heat and for the climates of all those lovely landmasses. And although it isn't due to collapse for another 50 or 100 years, few, there is research suggesting it's significantly slowed down in the last 20 years, and that its decreased capacity to move heat, as well as there being more heat to move, are probably, at least in part, responsible for regional climate change. The cost to deal with shifting climate change is an ever-growing fraction of the economy, but these are the costs to rebuild, not to fix or reverse climate change. A catastrophe all on its own, climate change in polycrisis terms is more like an apocalypse multiplier. In limits to growth terms, it's an externality stomping on an already stressed system. And there are plenty of other crises that exacerbate the crisis of resources. Ukraine, Sudan, the Middle East are all crises that drain and put pressure on the global system, and there are many other examples. The recalibration paper rightly mentions that one of its limitations is lack of regional specificity. I think another limitation, and not one that could plausibly be overcome, is the unknown factor of the psychological and ideological reaction to hitting the resource limit. When I was researching this, I went through a lot of material written for commodity investors, and there was cognizance there that resources are limited, but obviously as investors that's a good thing. Hey, we're heading for a silver shortage. Buy now. I have to wonder how people will react and how that too will contribute to, well, whatever comes next. That, along with how the beginning of a systems collapse might play out, is what I'll be discussing in part 3. And by discussing, I mean I'll be talking and you'll be sitting sort of scrolling whilst on the toilet, doing your business, you dirty fecker. Don't forget to wash your hands. I want to stress that even if the models are accurate, society isn't going to collapse tomorrow. You're not going to wake up one day and not going to be able to buy milk ever again. It's just going to get incrementally ever more stressful with punctuations of vivid symptoms, perhaps. And even if it does all happen, even if industrial output does collapse and upends the economy, we can all then come together in great harmony without blame or anger. It'll be great. Worse things have happened at sea. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to smash that button. Which button? Whatever. I don't care. Smash any button. I'm going off to find a button right now. Any red button that says do not press. That's the button for me. See you later. Come here, button, motherfucker.